Good evening, all. I am Brian P. Easton, author of the Autobiography of a Werewolf Hunter series, and this is Whiskey with the Werewolf Hunter. Welcome back to the Werewolf Bar, everyone, for your April installment of our 4th season here on YouTube. If you're new to the show, this is where we sample different whiskeys, affectionately referred to as the creature of the night, and discuss the finer points of monster hunting and occult phenomena and the wherefore and the why of my book series. Not necessarily in that order, except for the creature, which always comes first. And tonight we are having a taste of Minor Case Straight Rye Whiskey out of Lebanon, Kentucky. Now, you know I love a good rye. And this came highly recommended as a limited brand, as how Master Distiller MC Beam's rye might have tasted had Prohibition not shut him down. So let's see what we have here. It's been a while since we had a good rye on the show, I think. To you. Well, now that is a smooth sipping rye. It has the spice and the notes of the sherry cask from its 6 months in it finishing up. And for a 2-year-old rye in its price range, it really ticks all the right boxes. Not a lot of nuances to it, really. But like I said, it's got an exceptionally smooth finish and a really earthy nose to it. So huzzah to the folks at Limestone Branch. Your gold medals for this whiskey are well deserved. Well, if you know the show at all, you know that for the last few months I've been wrapping up the 5th book to my series, The Winter Fox Journals, Book 2. Tonight I'm happy to report that not only am I finished with it, but it has been turned over to the publisher. The contract has been signed, and I've even submitted some cover art that's been approved, which I will unveil in a future episode. We still have to go through editing and post-production, but if all goes smoothly, we should be seeing the Winter Fox Journals Book 2 hit the shelves, so to speak, by summer. A moment ago, I mentioned that one of the things that we do here on Whiskey with the Werewolf Hunter is to discuss some of the finer points of monster hunting. For instance, in some early episodes, we went over the code of the monster hunter, and we've talked about monster hunters from film, literature, and mythology, but perhaps nothing encapsulates the trade of monster hunting more than the weapons that are used against them. And it's for this reason we have this segment called Tools of the Trade. Here's Derek Tex Grebner.
Welcome to Tools of the Trade here on Whiskey with the Werewolf Hunter. I'm Tex Grebner, and we're going to be talking about Swords of a Monster Hunter. Now, a lot of what we get in fiction has more to do with brand recognition than what the character would actually be carrying, period, correct. That brings me to why I decided this topic this time, is because I recently got into the Savage Stories of Solomon Kane. But brand recognition is important because instead of this being a court sword or a dueling sword or a small sword, this is a rapier. This is a thrusting sword. Solomon Kane used a rapier. This is a thrusting sword. Writers can be very confusing when it comes to weaponry because Alexandre Dumas wrote the Three Musketeers series long after that time period. And when you think rapier, you think Three Musketeers. However, it's entirely likely that at the time period, Athos, Porthos, and Aramis and D'Artagnan would have been using cut and thrust style early rapiers. Now this one, as you can see, has a triangle cross section. Now this one actually has a bald tip, as in rounded tip. So in my demonstration, because it's very springy and it's an actual heavy fencing sword, this isn't actually going to break clay pigeons that I am going to thrust out of the air. A rapier and small sword and such, it won't cut your head off. But if you take this in a slashing motion and these sides are beveled, that is still, if you catch it here, going to go deep enough to cause you some serious problems. But this probably isn't what Solomon Kane would have actually carried. Now this is a Scottish style basket hilt, but this is a cut and thrust sword. Solomon Kane, being an English Puritan, really wouldn't have used a Scottish basket hilt. He would have probably had the English basket hilt or mortuary sword, as they were called. And this is a cut and thrust sword. This you can cut with and you can thrust with. Meteoric iron, not really easy to find. Silver, not great. But remember when I did my sword cane video, how I talked about how the sword cane was a glorified shiv? Even if silver is not a good blade material, it doesn't have to be super sharp as long as it's super pointy. But also, the master smith, Rutger Smith, probably could have fashioned, or someone in his family could have fashioned, a rapier blade with the triangle cross section rather than the diamond shaped cross section out of silver that would have been sharp enough per se and pointy enough to be functional. Assuming that, again, Rutger Smith could possibly create a saber, a cutlass, or a mortuary sword, or a Scottish basket hilted claymore out of silver, who knows? But I must admit, if you take a close look at this, I have a skull on my cup hilt here on my dueling sword, so that could be homage to everybody's favorite Puritan Cavalier. So I hope you guys enjoyed watching this week's episode of Tools of the Trade here on Whiskey with the Werewolf Hunter.
Thank you, Tex. And you know, who doesn't love swords, right? Whether your inspiration comes from animation, the cinema, or pulp fiction, like Robert E. Howard and Solomon Kane, just about everybody can appreciate a sword of some type on some level. And I'm glad Tex brought up the character of Solomon Kane because he is one of those literary characters who influenced Sylvester's dogged and remorseless pursuit of the beast. If you don't know, Solomon Kane is an English Puritan who has been a privateer and has since devoted his life to the destruction of evil in all its forms, including human variety and the supernatural. Now, he uses both a Spanish rapier and a brace of flintlock pistols, and sometimes the Staff of Solomon. So a Spanish rapier, according to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, looks something like this. I myself grew up infatuated with the dueling style of Zorro, and I was mesmerized by the sword fights in those movies from the 60s and 70s. And of course, as a teenager, I learned all about the different basic sword types from playing Dungeons and Dragons. What I have here is not a Spanish rapier, but it is along the lines of Texas basket hilt sword as far as the blade goes. Now, this is a cut and thrust sword, but it's meant to be wielded with one hand like a rapier, unlike, say, a Japanese katana or a Highlander's claymore, which you'd have to be quite a man to wield one of those things with one hand. I was also glad that he brought up Rutger Smith from the first Winter Fox journals, who was an older man, a Dutchman, whose family had developed a certain method of preparing steel that allowed bullets to be made from it without the usual drawbacks. Now, Rutger Smith did not develop these techniques, but benefited from them and passed his knowledge along down to Michael, who apprenticed under him for a time. The backstory of the Smith family is that they date back to the Middle Ages, where they were better known as alchemists than silversmiths. And so Tex supposes correctly in his thoughts about how that family would have been able to create a functional silver sword without alloying it with like copper for strength. You can forge silver, cold forge it, which strengthens it, but it also makes it brittle. And so I'm confident, though, through the Smith family secret, a blade could be created with at least the tensile properties of bronze, if not iron. True, it might not last very long parrying steel swords, but that's not really what they're designed for. A sword like we're talking about would be a weapon of execution, not battle. So unless your hunter is sword fighting a werewolf, the werewolf in question, I'd say you've got a pretty decent weapon to use against the beast. So that's my dust up, but I do want to go on with this a little more and talk about things besides silver that are effective in battling the werewolves in my mythos. Now, we know that werewolves can harm each other with tooth and claw. We know that they're subject to being wounded astrally or in the spirit world. And we know from the scars on Peter's stub, made by a saber-toothed cat and a prehistoric ape, that they are not immune to attacks from natural creatures. Also consider the fate of the Himalayan darkest wolven in the lineage when a super pack of Tibetan wolves comes on the scene. Aconite or wolfsbane has a narcotic effect on them, but these things are marginal threats at best. And in the absence of silver, nothing really packs a punch to the lineage like something sacred. Aroma's mystical coin, fired from a howdah pistol, for instance, or a sacred Native American lance head forged from meteoric iron. My werewolves are a very supernatural race, and to affect them requires a very supernatural means. Silver is their natural bane, venomous to them in proportion to how they are affected by the moon. But magic can get the job done too. It just has to be powerful enough to overcome the werewolf in question. It is definitely not a one-size-fits-all kind of concept. So, say a priest blesses a lead core bullet, it might do the job, whereas if the same bullet is blessed by a pontiff, its effectiveness in theory, and all things being equal, is going to go a lot further with the kind of werewolf that it can kill. I say all things being equal, meaning a corrupt bishop's blessing wouldn't amount to much, whereas a blessing from a devout vicar just might. And I'm using the Roman Catholic paradigm here just because I think we're pretty familiar with that hierarchy, if only from movies. But the same can be said for Buddhist monks, pagan shaman, Vodun Hunguns and Mambos, a Sikh's kirpan. His ritual dagger might pierce a werewolf hide, and sutras from a Shinto Shinshoku might ward them off. But as powerful as faith can be, more often or not, disbelief is more pervasive, which is an advantage to the wolf. And not only because no one believes in them, but also because it might never cross the mind of a potential werewolf slayer to weaponize their faith. Silver, on the other hand, doesn't care what you believe. It works even in the hands of someone like Sylvester, who I think we can all agree is pretty far removed from any sort of a holy person. And for that matter, I don't think it necessarily even has to be something holy or sacred. I can completely conceive of a practitioner of the black arts using them to summon and control a werewolf. And I have, in the person of the Reverend Blackscrabble, aka the minister. Although it would take a pretty powerful necromancer, Bokor, or Ecclesiazzi to cross swords with the likes of a high and noble Wolven. Anyway, this discussion came up on one of my groups, and it was a topic recommended for discussion here this evening. So at the beginning of the program, one of the things I mentioned that we do here is to question the wherefore and the why of things as they pertain to my book series. And for that, we have Amanda Rogers, who reads between the lines that I've written to better understand what's going on there. Now, we've all read books or seen films where we didn't quite get what was happening, or we thought there might be more to the scene than met the eye. And didn't you wish you could just ask the director or the author just what the hell that was all about? Headcanon and fan theories aside, I tried to field such questions as they come along, courtesy of Amanda Rogers and Amanda Asks.
Hi Brian, hi Internet. I was rereading the Michael Winter Fox book, the Diaries Book 1, spoilers before we go too far, and I was wondering, is there a reason when Michael's mother was turned post-mortem, or rather bitten before she died and then come back alive turned, was there a reason that she turned more into a ghoul or a monster than an actual werewolf? And given enough time, would she have healed enough to become more a werewolf, or would she have stayed undead wolf forever? There's something odd there, and I wonder, will it be addressed in book 2, or is it something we should already know and that I've missed? Keep wondering.
Okay, so good question, Amanda. And she's referring to the incident where Michael's mother, aka Red Deer Lady, dies. Just to set it up briefly, Michael's chief mentor has gone to a gathering of medicine people. And Red Deer Lady didn't go because she had a premonition that something bad was going to happen. So when the medicine man doesn't return from the gathering, Michael's father stands in the tombs and his cousin, Laughing Dog, go to look for him. Michael's father comes back home sometime later and is severely wounded to the point that he should be dead and isn't. Skip ahead a little bit, and Michael finds his father sitting beside his mother, who has been bitten in the shoulder and is in the process of bleeding out. She dies from the bite that's meant to mark her. But what has happened is that both occur at the exact same time, creating a sort of necro-wolf. So the mother's body is put on a burial scaffold for a number of days in accordance with the tradition of the Northern Cheyenne until her body is ready to be taken down and buried. But when they get to the scaffold, her body isn't there. We find out later that the wolf Michael calls Painted Face, who is a skinwalker and a witch of the Dene, or the Navajo people, has chained her in a casket. And there's a brief scene where Painted Face and Bloody Beard, who is his European compatriot, are interacting, and Bloody Beard tells Painted Face that he better get a certain pauper's coffin off the mortician's porch before Wolventide, which is the 3 nights of the full moon waxing to waning. Now, this indicates that when the next moon is full, something's going to happen to whatever is inside that casket. When Michael finds it on a train car while trying to kill the two wolves, the creature inside of the coffin starts busting out, to which Bloodybeard says to Painted Face, quote, "Your pet is about to slip its cage," which further indicates or points to the Skinwalker's involvement with the whole thing. And of course, when the creature does break free and is struggling with the chains, Michael sees that it was his mother, and but she's more like a living dead animal, a greenish tint to her flesh, and he concludes right away that she was, quote unquote, bitten to death yet marked. She was the dead and decaying shell of my mother, except when a full moon ignited the wolf sickness inside her corpse. Wolf sickness. So that's how Michael and his allies first come to know the beast. It's not until near the end of the book when Michael finally confronts Painted Face again, and he tells him that he's not forgotten the part that he played in the desecration of his mother. The Skinwalker is bargaining for his life at this point, and he tells Michael that he only saw his mother casketed so she wouldn't be running wild, which is a thin lie to cover the fact that in her state, she was a curiosity to him. And he says, quote unquote, "Because I had never observed one marked in death before." And there was a sense of truth to what he was saying, it says. "It is the rarest of things. The birthmark must first find purchase at the exact moment of death, creating a corpse resurrected by moonlight." So this was obviously something Painted Face knew about beforehand and recognized in Michael's mother after she had been bitten and died. So yes, to boil it down, Michael's mother, had she continued to exist, would have been a corpse except for the full of the moon, an undead werewolf. And at some point, one imagines an undead werewolf's skeleton. Added to which, Red Deer Lady not only lost her life, but her spirit was lost as well, shattered. So it would never reach the Cheyenne camp of the dead, which is why Michael's grief was so great, because not only was he never going to see his mother again in this life, he wasn't going to see her in the afterlife either. Now, that's all I'm willing to say about that at this point, but there could be other wrinkles to the story yet to be revealed. I'll just leave that there. But if you have a question for Amanda to ask, be sure to send her an email at the address that was shown at the end of her segment, and we'll give it some air on the show. Now we move on to the other thing that I mentioned that we do here, and that is to delve into the occult and occult phenomena. The supernatural and the esoteric play a heavy and recurring role in my books. Pretty well anything from alchemy to the zodiac. And I think the series benefits better when people can better understand some of these principles and how they work. To that end, we have Dr. Broussard of Baton Rouge and his Occult Primer series we call Doc Talk Shop. So here now to talk poltergeists in his discussion of discarnate entities is Dr. T. Broussard.
Stop as part of Whiskey with the Werewolf Hunter. And tonight, we are looking to discuss a very important topic in the realm of spirits and their classification. We're talking specifically of the idea of poltergeist. Now, the word poltergeist really means noisy or troublesome spirit. You will often hear the word geist or spirit in other words like zeitgeist, which is the spirit of the age or spirit of the moment. A poltergeist is any kind of spirit, ghost, demon, what have you, that is known for making noise. There is one type of poltergeist. A poltergeist is also a kind of phenomena produced by usually adolescents with a great deal of psychic energy with which they unconsciously create the phenomena of polarizing the perfect around with energy, make noises, and they would appear to be haunted people or live in haunted houses, when in fact it is the manifestation of an ancient teenager's angst. In terms of the individual beings that poltergeist, actual poltergeist spirits are not very intelligent. They are anger, resentment, given expression. They are elemental, and they're not the sort of thing that you would consult for information. Interestingly, they are often the kind of spirit that people do get when they try to conduct seances or play with Ouija boards and things like that, because the energy of the people involved draws molested spirits or poltergeist, and then poltergeist has license to set up shop and wreak havoc. They are, in many respects, the spiritual equivalent to gremlins. They make a ruckus wherever they go. In fact, many of the more famous hexes or curses in magic, what they really do is send poltergeists to targets. Now, most people would associate poltergeists with haunted houses because of the kind of phenomena involved, but they're less attached to places than they are to people, because either they get plugged into a person, or like I said earlier, it's the person's unconscious either attracting or producing the poltergeist phenomena. In various forms of ceremonial magic, you will often read of something called the lesser banishing ritual, the pentagram, and one of the things that does is dismiss any possible poltergeist from an area so that you can do your work and not be disturbed, or sleep and not be disturbed. Because one of the lesser known things that poltergeists do is cause nightmares. Because the more nightmare, the more fear, the more fear, the more energy, the more ruckus they can make. And so, if you're dealing with a poltergeist phenomena, one of the worst things you can do is get obsessed with it and begin to feed into it by thinking every noise you hear is a poltergeist. If you're having a real poltergeist issue, you need to, one, take authority over the space you're in. Two, assert your authority over yourself. Three, command with the authority that you have asserted over yourself and that space. Command anything that should not be there to go, be gone, be banished. And then, most importantly, you need to invite protection from whatever you consider your higher power. And finally, you need to make an offering of thanks, whether prayer, song, or whatever, to your protector, and that will end the poltergeist phenomenon. If it doesn't, then you're not dealing with poltergeist. Because what you're dealing with there is you're breaking up its hold on the place or the individual involved. You're dispersing its energy and you're making the space and or person inhospitable for the poltergeist. You're basically cutting off its food supply. It's interesting to me personally that so much of what we see in horror movies, in terms of things flying around, spontaneous elemental fire, wind, and all that, that's all pretty much poltergeist phenomena. It's not as high level as some people think. The higher level beings, powers, their effects are going to be more subtle, they're going to be more intelligent. So, if you're dealing with somebody who dabbles in the occult and they have all this sort of very noisy, showy phenomena, you basically have someone who has invited poltergeist phenomena into their lives, and they need a kind of spiritual colonic to get that taken care of, otherwise they're going to have problems. And poltergeist trouble is usually an indicator of a bigger problem coming down the pipe. So, if you deal with the poltergeist phenomenon and you get the person on track, you can cut the bigger problem off in the past. You know, pretty much bigger spirits will use poltergeist phenomena as a way of oppressing the target, make them open to what's coming down the pipe. And if you but I don't want any force other than me, and the forces I choose being a big influence in my life. I'm picky that way. But that's just me. I'm a little bit of a control freak with regard to that. Now, it is common in today's generalist sense of the occult to think of poltergeists as the spirits of the dead. They're not. They are animalistic, they're elemental, they're noisy and all that stuff, and they are kind of phenomena many kinds of spirits can cause that sort of phenomena. Among them, the dead, but it's not exclusive to the dead. That phenomena will sometimes use memories of the dead to make a living person afraid, thus giving the poltergeist energy. And so that's where that conflation comes from. It's very similar to a good example here. Certain beings will resonate with certain animals. And so some people associate the animal with the being, when in fact it's just an animal. But it's become associated. So because many poltergeists evoke memories of the dead because of their location and so forth, that's all that got conflated. Now you'll also see some dead ghosts have poltergeist company or cause poltergeist phenomena because they're hanging around. And the more ghosts hang on and become wraiths, the more sort of tricks they learn. And one of those tricks is how to make poltergeist stuff happen. And that is an interesting sideline because that is the type of thing a necromancer, someone who specializes in magic involving the dead, can take advantage of, because necromancer grabs a ghost with enough juice. It then has the intellect a ghost would have, plus the bag of tricks a poltergeist would have, and thus can do what the necromancer wants it to do. But even so, the real will, the real intellect is not the ghost or the poltergeist, it's the necromancer. And necromancy, to be quite frank, for various reasons, is one of the most dangerous types of magic out there. And it is legitimately one of the blackest of the black arts, to paraphrase an old friend of mine. So, while I'm aware that there's a lot of so-called information that you can find online about all kinds of things, I would encourage any viewer of mine not to play with necromantic magic of any kind. You open too many doors and you have trouble. And if you want to understand what kind of trouble, look at any modern haunted house movie or possession movie. That is essentially necromantic dabbling gone bad in many cases. Case in point, in the movie The Exorcist, girl starts out by talking to what she thinks is a dead person through a Ouija board, which itself is a kind of poltergeist phenomena because you have an unknown entity moving the planchette that may be claiming to be a dead person or whatever, but is not. So think about that at your next slumber party. Poltergeists are the kind of entity that we are both very familiar with in pop culture and in various forms of culture around the world, and yet not. Because we know the phenomena, the banging of pots and pans, opening of doors, the stirring up of feelings of oppression, all that kind of stuff. But we often project that phenomena onto the dead or demons, when in fact it's either something very small, an elemental type, or, like I said earlier, essentially a psychic projection, a thought form from the unconscious. Now, with regard to things like seances, and there have been studies about this, if enough people work on a thought form collectively, consciously together, they can produce a spirit form, a poltergeist. And in magic, this is what is called evocation, not to be confused with invocation. When you evoke something, you're bringing it forth, bringing it out of something to where you are. When you are invoking something, you are calling something outside yourself, before yourself, or into yourself. Evocation is dangerous. Invocation is exponentially more dangerous than evocation. They are not interchangeable at all. When you're dealing with poltergeists, be sure to banish them and do not evoke, or worse of all, invoke them. You don't want to open that kettle of worms. It's not worth it. Not to mention there are medical bills involved and cleansing bills, and you end up paying people like me a lot of money. And believe me, it's worth every penny, but it's also a lot of work. Well, I hope this has been insightful. And as always, I'm Dr. C. Broussard. Good hunting, and mind the moon.
The doctor accommodated my request to discuss poltergeists this evening because I've always been interested in them. As Doc pointed out, the word itself is German for noisy ghost or such the like. And I think it only adds to the confusion around the phenomena that's what it means. Because like Doc said, they aren't really ghosts at all. That is, they aren't the spirits of departed people. I admit trying to decide at one point whether they were elemental spirits or if they were psychic disturbances, the frustration of untapped libido in preteens and the stress that comes with adolescence kind of made manifest there. Well, as we just heard, the answer is both. And I liked how he used the film The Exorcist as an example of how the mischief of a spirit attached to a Ouija board steamrolls into a full-fledged Katie bar the door possession to the character of Regan. Personally, I have been witness to both kinds of events in my life. I was present at an exorcism, and that's all I'm going to say about that. But there was an incident from my bachelor years where friends of my youngest brother would come to my house to hang out with him after school. He was living with me at the time. One of the young ladies in this group turned out to be the focus of poltergeist activity. And even when she wasn't there, the poltergeist presented. I would wake up with the TV being switched on and at full volume. I had things broken in my kitchen when no one was there. And while I was watching, I saw books come being knocked off of my bookcase. And it was getting to the point where it was annoying, and it was more than annoying. And fortunately, I was able to recognize the symptoms of this, and I did just pretty much what a doc prescribed. I took charge of myself. I took charge of my house. I told it to kick rocks. And I had to do this a couple of times, but it did leave, and that was an end on it. So as always, many thanks to Dr. T for sharing his knowledge and his insight with us. We're lucky to have him here for the show. And thank you for stopping by tonight for Whiskey with the Werewolf Hunter. Let me invite you to like and subscribe before you leave, and to follow my Facebook page under Autobiography of a Werewolf Hunter. You can always drop me a line at brian@werewolfhunter.com, and you can visit us on the web at werewolfhunter.com. We'll look forward to seeing you again next time around, and we're on the same time every month. So until then, happy hunting and mind the moon.